Sir, step out of that tractor right now, or you're under arrest for trespassing and interfering with a court-ordered seizure. I'd just driven 9 brutal hours through a Christmas Eve blizzard to bury my grandfather and settle his bankrupt farm estate, only to find 3 HOA rent-a-cops chaining his old John Deere to a repo truck. Court-ordered? I snatched the papers. This is just an HOA violation notice, not from any judge. The lead guard smirked. Farms condemned for unpaid fines. Everything gets hauled away today. Grandpa died only 3 months ago. No one mentioned fines or seizures. These vultures waited until Christmas Eve to strip a dead man's legacy. Freezing wind, diesel fumes, and their smug power trip made my blood boil. I stared him down and said calmly, "You picked the wrong day, and the wrong family." What they didn't know about my day job was about to destroy their scam. What would you do if HOA goons tried stealing your family farm on Christmas Eve? My name is Owen Fletcher, and for 15 years I've hunted financial criminals for the FBI. But standing in my grandfather's driveway on Christmas Eve, watching rent-a-cops steal his John Deere, I felt like a rookie getting schooled by mall security. Harold Fletcher's Christmas tree farm had fed Christmas dreams since 1962. Every December, the smell of fresh pine mixed with hot chocolate steam while families searched his 40 acres for the perfect tree. Kids would ride on his shoulders, parents would argue about height, and Grandpa would just smile and help load their choice onto car roofs with rope that smelled like barn hay and diesel fuel. Then cancer hit like a freight train. Medical bills devoured everything. Experimental treatments, 3 surgeries, specialists who charged more per hour than most people made in a month. The farm went bankrupt 18 months ago, but Harold kept fighting until his heart gave out in September. I'd been managing the estate remotely from an undercover assignment in Seattle. Lawyers said it was simple. Sell equipment, pay debts, keep the land. Nobody mentioned vultures circling overhead, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That's when she arrived. Victoria Ashworth stepped out of a white Escalade like she was inspecting conquered territory. Designer handbag worth more than my grandfather's monthly Social Security, clipboard gripped like a legal weapon, dead shark eyes that screamed, HOA president with a god complex. Her vanity plate, community standards, because subtlety is apparently dead and buried next to common decency. Mr. Fletcher, her voice dripped fake concern like syrup from a cracked bottle. Victoria Ashworth, Pine Ridge Estates Development Authority. We have a situation that requires immediate attention. She thrust a folder thick enough to choke a horse. The pages rustled like dried leaves as I flipped through surveillance photos, violation notices, and bills that made my federal salary look like pocket change. 47,000 in accumulated violations, overgrown landscaping, unpermitted structures, unauthorized commercial activity, failure to maintain community aesthetic standards. Commercial activity? This is a Christmas tree farm that's been here since Eisenhower was president. Was a Christmas tree farm. Her heels clicked on frozen dirt like a countdown timer ticking toward execution. Community standards evolve, Mr. Fletcher. Your grandfather's rustic approach doesn't align with current property values or neighborhood expectations. The folder contained surveillance photos of my family's land shot from every conceivable angle. Time-stamped, measured, cataloged like evidence in a federal RICO case. Someone had been stalking this place for months, documenting every blade of grass that grew too tall, every board that weathered naturally. You have exactly 48 hours to remit payment in full, she continued, checking her gold watch like time was money, which apparently it was. After that, seizure proceedings begin immediately. 47 grand for letting grass grow while my grandfather fought for his life? Show me your legal authority for these assessments. She smiled like a crocodile eyeing a wounded deer. Emergency community protection powers, Mr. Fletcher. When significant investments are threatened by neglect, we're authorized to act decisively. Her perfume, vanilla mixed with pure entitlement, battled the diesel fumes from her repo truck. We're not villains here. We're protecting what honest, hardworking families have invested in this community. I surveyed her version of honest, hardworking families. Cookie-cutter McMansions squatting on former rangeland like suburban tumors. Every lawn perfect as a golf course, every driveway identical, every house screaming, "I moved here from California and brought my unrealistic expectations with me." But I could still see the real Pine Ridge in the distance. Hank's auto shop with Christmas lights strung between the bay doors. Margaret's little house where she'd taught third grade for 40 years, her porch light still welcoming. The places where community meant helping your neighbor, not calculating their property tax contribution. Of course, Victoria purred. If payment proves financially challenging, we have investors standing by to purchase at fair market value. 20 cents on the dollar should adequately compensate for such distressed assets. 20 cents. For 60 years of Christmas memories and 3 generations of sweat equity. That's when it clicked like a gun being cocked. This wasn't bureaucratic harassment or overzealous HOA enforcement. This was a heist, organized, calculated, probably illegal, and definitely the kind of sophisticated financial crime I'd spent my career dismantling one wire transfer at a time. The only question was, how deep did this rabbit hole go, and who else was about to get buried in it? The next morning, Christmas Day, because apparently even Jesus gets no respect from these people, I was nursing coffee that tasted like motor oil when a convoy pulled into my driveway. County Environmental Inspector Bradley Kowalski climbed out of an official-looking truck, followed by 3 guys in hazmat suits and a news crew that just happened to be in the neighborhood. What are the odds? Environmental emergency assessment, Kowalski announced, waving paperwork like he was serving a federal warrant. Anonymous tip reported potential soil contamination from illegal agricultural chemicals. Illegal agricultural chemicals? Grandpa used about as much chemistry as a kindergarten art class. I need to see your credentials, I said, pulling out my phone to photograph his badge. The name looked familiar, but I couldn't place it immediately. Kowalski started pointing at the old fertilizer shed like it was Chernobyl. Immediate hazmat cleanup required. $85,000, payable within 72 hours, or the property gets condemned. 85 grand, on top of Victoria's 47, during Christmas weekend when every court in the state was closed. That's when the news crew swooped in like vultures on roadkill. Channel 7 News. Sir, how do you respond to allegations that your family farm has been poisoning the local water supply? The same well that had tested clean every year for 6 decades? The reporter's aggressive tone made my teeth clench, but something else was bothering me. While she shoved the microphone in my face, I kept staring at Kowalski's signature on the paperwork. Then it hit me like a freight train. Oregon, 2022. Developer kickback scheme. This bastard had falsified contamination reports to help developers steal waterfront property. I'd spent 6 months building that federal case, watching him take bribes disguised as consulting fees. He was supposed to be in federal prison, not standing in my grandfather's driveway. Mr. Kowalski? I called out, loud enough for the cameras to catch. Interesting career change. Last I heard, you were serving federal time for falsifying environmental reports. His face went white as the hazmat suits his crew was wearing. While Kowalski scrambled to explain his presence to the suddenly interested news crew, I stepped inside and fired up my laptop. Federal databases don't take holidays, and muscle memory from 15 years of investigations kicked in automatically. I'd learned long ago that environmental inspectors need state licensing, something you can verify online in 5 minutes if you know where to look. Real inspectors carry liability insurance, provide detailed testing protocols, and follow chain of custody procedures for samples. Fake inspectors love emergencies because scared property owners don't ask questions. 10 minutes later, I had everything: his complete criminal history, current parole status, and, most interesting, bank records showing a $40,000 deposit 3 days ago from Pine Ridge Environmental Consulting LLC. The smell of Kowalski's cheap cologne mixed with diesel exhaust from the news van, but underneath that I caught something familiar from 100 interrogation rooms, the sour scent of fear sweat from someone who knows they're about to get caught. Mr. Fletcher, the reporter cornered me again. Do you have any comment about the environmental dangers your property allegedly poses? I looked directly into the camera. I have complete confidence that properly licensed, legitimate authorities will conduct a thorough investigation using established protocols. The emphasis on legitimate and properly licensed made Kowalski's eye twitch. He whispered something urgent into his phone and started packing equipment. As they loaded up their circus, I noticed something telling. The hazmat team never actually collected soil samples. They photographed the shed, waved handheld devices around for the cameras, but never followed proper collection procedures. Because you can't fake lab results on soil that isn't actually contaminated. Victoria's Escalade pulled up just as the news van was leaving. Perfect timing, almost like she'd been watching from somewhere nearby. "Such a tragedy," she said, stepping carefully around imaginary contamination in designer heels that probably cost more than my grandfather's last disability check. Environmental issues make property practically worthless, but don't worry. Our investors are still willing to help, despite the complications. "Mrs. Ashworth," I said, scrolling through my laptop screen, "I'm curious about Pine Ridge Environmental Consulting. Your company paid Inspector Kowalski $40,000 3 days ago." Her smile could have frozen hell. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "Federal conviction for environmental fraud, currently on parole, just received payment from your consulting firm. That's quite a coincidence." "Mr. Fletcher, I think grief may be affecting your judgment." "No grief here, just professional experience with environmental fraud cases." I held up the screen showing Kowalski's criminal record. "Did you know hiring convicted felons to falsify government reports is a federal crime? RICO conspiracy if it's part of a pattern." Her face went pale as Christmas snow. She clicked back to her car without another word, but I caught her frantic phone conversation through the window. Someone was about to have a very uncomfortable discussion about operational security. As her taillights disappeared, I realized this wasn't just local corruption. This was organized crime with federal implications. And they'd just made the mistake of running their scam on someone who knew how to build federal cases. Time to see how deep this rabbit hole went. By December 26th, Victoria's little operation had kicked into overdrive. I woke up to find my mailbox stuffed with 31 separate violation notices, each one more creative than a Hollywood scriptwriter having a breakdown. Unauthorized agricultural structures. Commercial activity without retail permits. Failure to maintain aesthetic community standards. My personal favorite, unlawful storage of vintage farming equipment. Apparently my grandfather's 1960 John Deere was now a neighborhood eyesore that threatened property values. Each violation came with its own fine, $500 here, $2,000 there. By the time I finished reading, they were demanding $23,000 in retroactive business licensing fees for Christmas tree sales dating back to 2019. The smell of fresh ink on the notices mixed with my morning coffee, which was starting to taste like liquid stress. I spread the papers across the kitchen table like evidence files, which, I was beginning to realize, is exactly what they were becoming. Then my phone rang with the kind of cheerful professionalism that usually precedes bad news. "Mr. Fletcher, this is Jennifer Walsh from Cascade Collection Services. We've been retained to collect on your outstanding HOA obligations. Our records show you're currently $112,000 in arrears." $112,000. Yesterday it was 47 plus 85. Apparently mathematics worked differently in Victoria's parallel universe where 2 plus 2 equals whatever number gets you the farm. "I'm going to need documentation of these alleged debts." "Sir, documentation was provided. We're calling to arrange immediate payment or discuss asset seizure options. We can accept cash, certified funds, or begin repossession proceedings within 24 hours. Asset seizure on the day after Christmas. These people had hearts carved from pure concrete and souls leased from a payday loan company. "What's your legal authority for asset seizure?" "We're fully authorized by our client. I should mention that your bank accounts have been flagged for protective review pending resolution." They'd frozen my accounts, without a court order, during Christmas weekend. That's when my federal training kicked into overdrive. While Jennifer droned about payment options, I opened my laptop and started pulling threads. Cascade Collection Services, registered in Delaware 3 months ago, right after Grandpa's death. Registered agent, Pine Ridge Environmental Consulting. Victoria's environmental scam was also her collection racket. But here's where it got interesting. Pine Ridge Environmental was owned by Mountain View Development LLC, which belonged to Pristine Valley Holdings, which ultimately traced to Ashworth Family Trust. Victoria hadn't just created a shell company. She'd built an entire shell empire that would make Russian oligarchs jealous. The phone buzzed with a text that made my blood pressure spike. "Account access suspended pending verification." First Bank of Pine Ridge, where Grandpa had banked since the Kennedy administration, had just locked me out. Then came the mini twist that changed everything. I pulled up the bank's website to find customer service contact info, and there it was in the staff directory. Tom Walsh, bank president, Jennifer Walsh's brother. The collection agent threatening me was the sister of the bank president freezing my accounts. Victoria hadn't just captured the HOA. She'd infiltrated the entire local financial infrastructure. I drove into town to verify my suspicions and found Margaret Henley hanging Christmas lights despite the freezing wind that could strip paint off a barn door. She'd taught third grade here for 40 years. If anyone knew where the bodies were buried, it would be her. Owen! Her breath formed small clouds as she waved me over. Heard you're having trouble with Queen Victoria and her merry band of land pirates. That's one way to put it. How long has she been running this operation? Margaret's face darkened like storm clouds over the Rockies. Started innocent enough, new landscaping rules, architectural guidelines. Then she realized people were too scared or too broke to fight back. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. 3 families lost their properties this year. Same playbook every time. Let me guess. Violations, fines, impossible debt, convenient investors. Bingo. The Johnsons, the Kowalskis, old Pete Brennan's ranch, all became McMansions within 6 months. She gestured toward the cookie-cutter suburbs. Everyone used to be a working farm. My phone rang again. Same number. Mr. Fletcher, this is your final notice. We're prepared to settle for 60 cents on the dollar if you can arrange immediate payment. Something had changed in Jennifer's voice. Less confident, more desperate, like someone had told her to close this deal before it exploded in their faces. I'll need to review documentation with my attorney. Sir, we need resolution today. Our authorization expires at midnight. Authorization expires? What kind of legitimate collection agency operates on a timer? Then I'll need your supervisor. Dead silence for 30 seconds, then muffled voices in the background, including Victoria's voice mentioning federal complications and accelerating timeline. They knew who I was, and they were panicking. When Jennifer returned, her desperation was palpable. Upon further review, we can settle for $10,000. From $112,000 to $10,000 in one phone call. That wasn't negotiation. That was pure panic. I'll consider it, I said, and hung up. Sitting in my truck, I realized Victoria's mistake. She'd built a criminal enterprise designed to prey on isolated, vulnerable families, but she'd just tried to run it on a federal agent who specialized in exactly this kind of financial fraud. Game on. December 27th brought psychological warfare that would have made Joseph Goebbels proud. I woke up to find anonymous flyers stuffed under every door in the neighborhood, featuring a grainy photo of me that looked like it was taken during a particularly bad hangover, with the headline, "Federal Agent Under Investigation. Is your family safe?" The text read like a paranoid fever dream. FBI agent Owen Fletcher is currently under federal investigation for abuse of authority and misuse of government resources. Sources confirm he's using Pine Ridge as a base for illegal surveillance operations targeting innocent families. Protect your children. Demand answers. Anonymous sources. Right. The same anonymous sources who probably drove a white Escalade and answered to Your Majesty. My phone started buzzing before I finished my first cup of coffee, which was beginning to taste like liquid anxiety mixed with a dash of impending doom. Mr. Fletcher, this is Carol Bentley from Maple Street. We're organizing a Pine Ridge Safety Committee meeting tonight to discuss your situation. My situation? The allegations. We simply cannot have federal agents conducting surveillance operations in a family neighborhood. Think of the children. Think of the children. The universal battle cry of busybodies who've never had an original thought in their lives. By noon, I'd fielded 15 calls from concerned citizens demanding everything from background checks to complete relocation. Victoria's whisper campaign was spreading faster than gossip at a church potluck. The real masterpiece came when I drove to Hank's auto shop. The familiar smell of motor oil and honest work usually cleared my head, but today something felt wrong. No cheerful wave from under a hood, no radio playing classic rock, just uncomfortable silence thick enough to cut with a wrench. I found Hank in his office, drowning in paperwork and looking like he'd aged a decade overnight. "Owen," he said without meeting my eyes, "I can't work on your truck anymore." "Engine trouble?" "Nothing wrong with your truck." His voice carried the weight of a man being forced to compromise his integrity. "It's the business. All my commercial accounts got calls yesterday, something about liability concerns working with someone under federal investigation." The economic pressure campaign had moved beyond isolation. They were targeting anyone who might help me, turning basic commerce into loyalty tests. "Hank, you know that flyer is complete bullshit." "Course I know." He finally looked up, frustration and anger warring in his weathered face. "But I got 3 kids, a mortgage, and half my income comes from those McMansion folks. They made it crystal clear, support you, lose their business." Walking back to my truck, I noticed something that made my federal prosecutor instincts start tingling. The flyer paper had a distinctive texture, the same high-quality stock used for campaign materials. More interesting was a tiny printer's mark in the bottom corner, CCS 2025. CCS, Cascade Campaign Services, the same Cascade as the collection agency. Victoria wasn't just running multiple scams, she was using the same infrastructure for all of them. I spent the afternoon in Grandpa's study, cross-referencing business registrations with my laptop, while the afternoon light filtered through windows that hadn't seen this much investigative action since he researched seed catalogs. What I discovered was political corruption that made organized crime families look like amateur hour. Cascade Campaign Services had printed materials for every local election in the past 4 years. County commissioners who fast-tracked Victoria's permits, school board members who approved her rezoning requests, ballot initiatives that expanded HOA authority beyond all reason. She hadn't just captured the local economy, she'd been systematically purchasing democracy one election at a time. Here's something they don't teach you in civics class. Using campaign resources to print anonymous attack materials is federal election fraud. And coordinating those attacks with collection agencies and development schemes? That's RICO conspiracy with a federal bow on top. My phone rang around 5 p.m. Unknown number with that particular tone that screams, "Reporter looking for blood." Agent Fletcher, Rebecca Martinez, Channel 12 Investigative Unit. We're following up on reports of unauthorized federal operations in Pine Ridge. Care to comment? The rumor had evolved from surveillance to full rogue agent status. Victoria's telephone game was more effective than a viral TikTok video. Ms. Martinez, I'm here settling my grandfather's estate. Nothing more interesting than probate paperwork and family memories. But you are an active federal agent conducting operations? Classic media trap. Answer yes, confirm their narrative. Answer no, commit lying to press. I'd love to discuss my grandfather's 60-year history of serving Christmas tree customers. Want to interview families who've been coming here since the Eisenhower administration? Dead silence. Clearly not the federal conspiracy angle she'd prepared for. We're more interested in the investigation reports. There is no investigation into my presence here, but there might be one into whoever's spreading false information about federal agents. That's felony impersonation of law enforcement, by the way. Carries 20 years if you're curious about research angles. She hung up faster than a telemarketer caught in a caller ID trap. As darkness fell over the kitchen where Grandpa had planned 60 Christmases, I surveyed the tools of modern character assassination, anonymous flyers, economic blackmail, corrupted media, purchased politicians. Victoria had built something more dangerous than simple fraud. She'd weaponized community itself, turning neighbor against neighbor, truth against convenience, fear against reason. But she'd made one fatal miscalculation. Federal agents don't back down from intimidation. We document it, analyze it, and use it to build cases that end careers and destroy criminal enterprises. The Pine Ridge Safety Committee meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. Time to watch Victoria's psychological operation in full display, and start gathering evidence for the prosecution that would end her reign of suburban terror. My grandfather used to say the strongest Christmas trees grew in the darkest soil. Tonight I was about to discover exactly how toxic Victoria's soil had become. The Pine Ridge Safety Committee meeting was manufactured outrage served with stale coffee and cookies that tasted like cardboard. 43 concerned citizens packed into a community center that smelled like disinfectant and broken democracy. Victoria sat front row center playing concerned neighbor with practiced righteousness. Her vanilla perfume was losing the battle against nervous sweat, always promising when cornering suspects. Agent Fletcher refuses to explain his surveillance activities, she declared with soap opera drama. Our community deserves transparency. While Victoria performed her federal conspiracy theater, I quietly recorded everything. Future witnesses for the criminal case this was becoming. But the real breakthrough had come that afternoon in Grandpa's old safe. Hidden behind insurance papers, I'd found the original 1962 Federal Agricultural Preservation Agreement. Most property owners don't know small farms can qualify for federal protection. During the Kennedy administration, Grandpa had enrolled in a program protecting working agricultural land through tax incentives and regulatory shields. The language was devastatingly clear. Property maintains perpetual agricultural use classification, superseding all local zoning restrictions, homeowner association authorities, and municipal development requirements. Every violation, fine, and seizure attempt had been federally illegal from day one, but the emotional gut punch came with an attached letter in Grandpa's shaky handwriting, dated 3 months before his death. Owen, if you're reading this, the vultures are circling. That Ashworth woman wants the farm for her resort project. She doesn't know about federal protections. Use your training. Don't let them steal what we built. Evidence enclosed. Harold. He'd known. While fighting cancer that drained his savings, my grandfather had been gathering evidence against Victoria's conspiracy. The envelope contained wire transfers to county officials, recorded conversations discussing eliminating property obstacles, and architectural plans for Pine Ridge Mountain Resort, with our farm marked as acquired through municipal cooperation. Agent Fletcher, Victoria announced theatrically, our neighbors deserve to know why the federal government has targeted our peaceful community. The room fell silent. 43 suspicious pairs of eyes turned toward me. I stood slowly, preservation agreement in hand like a legal grenade. Mrs. Ashworth, they deserve to know why you've been running organized fraud operations using fake violations and shell companies. Her smile cracked like warming ice. I have no idea. Pine Ridge Environmental, Cascade Collection, Mountain View Development. All owned by your family trust, all engaged in systematic fraud. But most importantly, I continued, unfolding the document, this farm has been under federal agricultural protection since 1962. Every violation notice has been a federal crime punishable by 20 years. Victoria's face went white. That's impossible. We conducted legal research, not extensive enough. Federal protection supersedes all local authority. Here's what every rural property owner should know. Agricultural protection laws exist at multiple levels, but most people never research their property's historical designations. A simple record search can reveal protections that trump local political maneuvering. Never assume local authorities have unlimited power over agricultural land. Federal law often provides shields politicians hope you'll never discover. I opened Grandpa's evidence folder. Care to explain these wire transfers to county officials, these recorded conversations planning property seizures? The room erupted. Neighbors ready to lynch me were suddenly fascinated by Victoria's business practices. Those are fabricated, she stammered, authority evaporating. Federal entrapment? Ma'am, falsely accusing federal agents is another felony. I'd suggest calling a lawyer. She grabbed her purse and fled, but I delivered one final present. How many families have you destroyed? Mail fraud carries 20 years per victim. I'm counting 8 families so far. She froze like a deer in legal headlights. Federal grand juries love organized crime targeting elderly families. Voluntary cooperation might be your only shot at avoiding life in prison. She bolted, her panicked call carrying through the door. Emergency meeting. We have massive federal problems. As people shared horror stories, the scope became clear. Victoria had systematically destroyed families across the valley, stealing millions through manufactured violations. Now I had federal jurisdiction, documentary evidence, and authority that made her local connections irrelevant. The hunter had become the hunted. Victoria's emergency meeting that night lit up the Pine Ridge Development Office like a Christmas tree. Ironic, considering she was trying to destroy the valley's most famous Christmas tree farm. I sat in my truck across the street, watching luxury cars arrive like vultures gathering for roadkill. County Commissioner Walsh, Bank President Tom Walsh, 3 expensive suits I didn't recognize, and Victoria, pacing behind floor-to-ceiling windows while gesticulating like she was conducting an orchestra of pure panic. Time to coordinate my own meeting. I spent the next morning on encrypted calls with FBI Financial Crimes Division in Seattle. Agent Sarah Sterling, my former partner, nearly choked on her coffee when I explained the situation. You stumbled into a RICO conspiracy while settling your grandfather's estate? They targeted federal protected property and didn't expect the owner to fight back with federal resources. How many victims? Minimum 8 families. Wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, civil rights violations. Conservative estimate, $12 million in damages. Sarah whistled low. This could be our biggest rural fraud case. You want task force support? I want federal arrest warrants ready for simultaneous execution. These people have deep local connections. Move on one, the others disappear. Give me 48 hours. And Owen, don't do anything stupid. Too late for that advice, but I appreciated the sentiment. While waiting for federal cavalry, I had community preparations. Victoria's conspiracy relied on isolation, targeting vulnerable families, cutting community support, manufacturing legal emergencies that prevented organized resistance. Time to flip that script. I called Margaret Henley first. How would you feel about hosting Christmas Eve service at the Fletcher farm? Owen, that would be wonderful. Harold always dreamed of Christmas service in the old barn. This community needs to remember what Christmas actually means. I'll call Pastor Williams immediately. Next, Hank's auto shop. Despite economic pressure, Hank answered immediately. I can't work on your truck. I'm not asking for repairs. I need contractors willing to donate hours making an old barn safe for Christmas service. Silence. Then, how many contractors you need? Enough for lighting, heating, basic structural safety, pro bono community work. Give me 2 hours. By noon, I had commitments from 12 contractors, the Historical Society, local businesses donating supplies, and 3 church choirs. Word spread through the old Pine Ridge network. Families who remembered when community meant more than property values. The real masterstroke came when I called Channel 12 News. Ms. Martinez, Owen Fletcher, still interested in federal operations in Pine Ridge? Agent Fletcher, absolutely. How about this angle? Federal agent honors grandfather's legacy with community Christmas service at historically protected farm threatened by development fraud. Development fraud? Ma'am, I'm about to hand you the biggest local corruption story of the year. Federal charges against county officials, systematic property theft, organized conspiracy targeting elderly families. We'll be there tomorrow morning. Federal cases are beautiful for their documentation trails. Every wire transfer, forged document, and shell company coordination leaves digital fingerprints. While building her criminal empire, Victoria had also been building her own prosecution case. That afternoon, I walked the barn where Grandpa had stored 60 years of Christmas memories. The smell of old hay mixed with pine resin from decades of Christmas trees, rough wooden beams that had weathered Montana winters since Eisenhower. This building had hosted school programs, weddings, community meetings, everything that made Pine Ridge actual community instead of just zip codes. Here's what rural property owners should know. Agricultural buildings often qualify for historical preservation status, providing additional federal protections beyond standard agricultural designations. Historical status can prevent demolition even under intense development pressure. Check your property's historical status. Old barns and farmhouses often carry protections that developers pray you'll never discover. My phone buzzed with Sarah's text. Federal warrants approved. Task force arrives tomorrow evening. Press conference December 24th, 3 p.m. Try not to get arrested before we arrive. December 24th, Christmas Eve. The same day Victoria first tried to steal Grandpa's tractor. Perfect timing. But Victoria was planning her own final gambit. Around sunset, I noticed unusual activity, cars photographing the property, surveying equipment on the road. My phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Fletcher, this is Bradley Kowalski from Pine Ridge Environmental. We need to discuss immediate safety concerns about your Christmas service. The same fake inspector from the contamination scam. Victoria was doubling down instead of cutting losses. Mr. Kowalski, you're currently on federal parole for environmental fraud. Regardless of past issues, I have authority to assess environmental hazards. Your planned gathering poses significant public safety risks. What specific risks? Structural collapse, soil contamination exposure, fire hazards from inadequate electrical systems. I'm prepared to issue emergency closure orders immediately. Emergency closure during Christmas week based on fabricated concerns from a convicted felon. I'll need current licensing and authority documentation. In emergencies, documentation can be provided after safety measures are implemented. That's not how emergency authority works. After hanging up, I understood Victoria's strategy. She couldn't stop the federal investigation, but she could prevent Christmas service that would generate media coverage and community support. Keep the story local, keep victims isolated, minimize public sympathy. But she'd made one critical error targeting my grandfather's farm for her final stand. I'd had 15 years learning how federal law enforcement dismantles organized crime. Time to give her a masterclass. December 23rd started with the smell of diesel fuel where it definitely shouldn't be. I woke up to find someone had doused the barn's exterior walls with enough fuel to barbecue half of Montana. The chemical stench mixed with pine needles and morning frost created an odor cocktail that screamed arson setup. My security cameras had caught everything. At 3 a.m., Victoria's nephew Derek Ashworth had arrived with 5-gallon containers, spending 40 minutes soaking the wooden walls like he was marinating a giant steak. If Victoria couldn't steal the farm legally, she'd burn down the evidence and blame faulty electrical systems during Christmas service. Criminal masterminds are rarely as smart as they think. While photographing fuel residue, my phone rang with official authority designed to make honest citizens nervous. Mr. Fletcher, Chief Inspector Williams, State Fire Marshal's Office. We've received reports of serious fire hazards related to tonight's Christmas service. Immediate safety inspection required. Immediate inspection on Christmas Eve morning, based on reports from someone definitely not concerned about public safety. What specific hazards were reported? Anonymous tip cited electrical violations, structural deficiencies, and accelerant materials stored inappropriately near the event venue. Accelerant materials. They weren't even trying subtlety anymore. I'll need to see credentials and inspection authority. In emergency situations involving public safety, credentials can be verified during inspection. Another fake inspector. Victoria's contact list was apparently full of convicted felons willing to impersonate government officials. But here's where Victoria made her critical mistake. She'd escalated to environmental terrorism on federally protected property while a federal task force was en route. While Chief Williams threatened closure orders, I quietly ran his voice through federal database recognition software. Bradley Kowalski's voice using a different name. The same environmental fraud convict was now impersonating a fire marshal. Federal impersonation of government officials, mandatory 5 years. Environmental terrorism on federal property, 20 more. Victoria's nephew's arson attempt qualified for domestic terrorism charges. Financial fraud had just escalated to federal terrorism. Chief Williams, I said calmly, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is Bradley Kowalski, convicted environmental fraud specialist, currently violating federal parole by impersonating officials. Dead silence, then dial tone. Within an hour, 3 actual fire trucks arrived, followed by genuine state marshals, real environmental inspectors, and enough legitimate officials to staff a small bureaucracy. When you report environmental terrorism on federally protected property, every acronym agency sends representatives. The real Chief Williams, a no-nonsense woman who'd seen every scam possible, examined the diesel-soaked walls and immediately called FBI hazmat. Mr. Fletcher, this is deliberate sabotage designed to create fire hazards justifying closure orders. Whoever did this wanted your building to burn with people inside. Victoria hadn't just been stealing property. She'd been willing to commit mass murder covering her tracks. By noon, Pine Ridge looked like a federal crime scene because it was one. FBI vehicles, environmental response teams, federal marshals, and enough agents to invade small countries. Agent Sarah Sterling arrived looking like Christmas had come early for prosecutors. Owen, when you said RICO conspiracy, you didn't mention environmental terrorism and attempted mass murder. I saved the best surprises for last. We've got evidence to prosecute the entire network under federal terrorism statutes. Wire fraud was just the appetizer. But Victoria wasn't finished. Around 2 p.m., while federal agents collected accelerant evidence, she made one final desperate play. A convoy arrived. County sheriff deputies, code enforcement officers, health inspectors, emergency management personnel. Every local official Victoria had bribed, making one last coordinated effort shutting down Christmas service. Sheriff Deputy Martina, whose campaign Victoria had funded, stepped forward with clipboard authority. Mr. Fletcher, we're executing emergency closure orders for multiple violations. This event cannot proceed. Emergency closure from every agency simultaneously. Victoria was deploying her entire network of corrupted officials for final assault, but she'd brought local corruption to a federal gunfight. Agent Sterling stepped forward, badge displayed like a legal weapon. Deputy Martinez, this property is under federal protection, and this investigation has federal jurisdiction. Explain your authority to override federal agricultural protections. We have emergency powers. Issued by whom? Commissioner Walsh, currently under federal investigation for accepting bribes. Bank President Tom Walsh, facing federal fraud conspiracy charges. The deputy's confidence cracked like warming ice. 2 choices, Sarah continued. Withdraw these illegal orders and cooperate with federal investigation, or join defendants facing federal conspiracy charges. One by one, county officials retreated to vehicles like vampires fleeing sunlight. Emergency powers disappear when confronted with federal authority backed by documentary corruption evidence. As the last county vehicle disappeared, Margaret Henley arrived with the first wave of Christmas service attendees. Owen dear, is everything ready for tonight? I surveyed the federal crime scene tape, hazmat equipment, and enough federal agents to staff a field office. Margaret, we're going to have the most well-protected Christmas service in Montana history. The smell of diesel was finally fading, replaced by something much sweeter, the scent of justice about to be served with Christmas cookies and federal arrest warrants. Victoria's reign of suburban terror was about to end in spectacular fashion. By 4 p.m. on December 23rd, with federal agents swarming Pine Ridge like ants discovering a dropped sandwich, Victoria played her most desperate card. My phone rang with a number from FBI Internal Affairs. Agent Fletcher, Inspector General Patricia Morrison. We've received a formal complaint alleging you're abusing federal authority for personal vendettas and using government resources to harass private citizens. The complaint, filed 2 hours ago by concerned citizen Victoria Ashworth, alleged I was conducting unauthorized surveillance operations and intimidating law-abiding developers with fabricated charges. Victoria was trying to get me investigated by my own agency while federal agents collected evidence of her terrorism attempts. The audacity was almost impressive. Inspector Morrison, are you aware this property is currently an active federal crime scene for environmental terrorism? That's exactly why this complaint is concerning. Using estate settlement as cover for unauthorized operations raises ethical questions. Mini twist, but here's what Victoria didn't know. Every action I'd taken was pre-authorized through FBI Financial Crimes as part of Operation Pine Ridge, a multi-state investigation into rural property fraud. Sarah Sterling had been tracking similar schemes across 3 states, and my grandfather's farm had become the perfect trap. Inspector Morrison, Agent Sterling from Financial Crimes should have briefed your office about Operation Pine Ridge yesterday. Keyboard clicking. Then, according to records, you've been operating under full federal authority since December 22nd. This complaint appears to be witness intimidation by subjects under investigation. Victoria's internal affairs gambit had backfired spectacularly. Filing false complaints against federal agents is obstruction of justice with mandatory prison time. Around 5 p.m., as contractors finished barn preparations, a national news van arrived. Rebecca Martinez from Channel 12 had sold the story to bigger networks. Agent Fletcher, David Sterling, National Crime Network, were investigating reports of federal overreach targeting rural developers. Care to comment on allegations you've manufactured terrorism charges to protect personal property? National media. Victoria was framing this as government harassment of small business owners, perfect for political narratives about federal abuse. Mr. Sterling, I'd be happy to discuss federal prosecution of organized crime targeting elderly rural families. Interested in interviewing victims who lost homes to systematic fraud? We're focused on federal authority abuse. Then you'll want the terrorism charges filed today against suspects who attempted arson at a community Christmas service. His expression shifted from skeptical to professionally interested. Terrorism sells better than property disputes. While Sterling set up cameras, my phone buzzed with texts from unknown numbers. Drop charges or family pays. Federal agents can have accidents. Christmas service might have unexpected fireworks. Direct threats against federal agents. Each text was another federal crime with mandatory sentences. Here's what law enforcement learns. Criminals always escalate when cornered and make mistakes when desperate. Victoria's network was doing both simultaneously. Agent Sarah Sterling arrived as sunset painted the snow-covered farm in gold and red that would make Norman Rockwell weep. She examined the threatening texts and smiled like a prosecutor receiving Christmas presents. Owen, they're threatening federal agents now. Automatic terrorism enhancement under the Patriot Act. How many federal crimes total? Per defendant? Wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, civil rights violations, environmental terrorism, impersonating officials, witness intimidation, obstruction, threatening agents. She counted fingers. Conservative estimate, 200 years per conspirator before plea bargaining. The national news crew was interviewing Margaret about farm history when Victoria arrived for final confrontation. She stepped from her Escalade like walking into a boardroom, not a federal crime scene. Agent Fletcher, we can resolve this misunderstanding like civilized adults. Misunderstanding. After arson attempts, fake inspectors, death threats, and false federal complaints. Mrs. Ashworth, the only discussion involves whether you surrender now or wait for public arrest during Christmas service. This has gone far enough. I'll offer compensation for perceived damages. You can't bribe your way out of federal terrorism charges. National cameras rolled, capturing every word. Victoria's damage control was being broadcast to audiences who would see privileged developers trying to buy their way out of federal prison. "You're making a mistake. I have connections you can't imagine. Your connections include a bribed commissioner, fraudulent bank president, and paroled environmental inspectors. Unless you know the FBI director personally, you're overestimating your influence." She turned to leave, but Sarah stepped forward with timing of someone who'd waited for this moment her entire career. "Victoria Ashworth, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit terrorism, wire fraud, money laundering, and 15 other federal charges. You have the right to remain silent, but honestly, silence won't help much at this point." As handcuffs clicked shut, Victoria's expression finally showed fear she'd been hiding behind entitlement and fake authority. "This isn't over," she hissed. "Ma'am," I replied, "for you, everything's over. But Christmas service starts in 2 hours and this community is about to remember what justice looks like." National cameras captured it all: arrest, evidence, community gathering despite terrorism attempts. By tomorrow, Victoria's mugshot would exemplify federal justice protecting rural families on every major network. The smell of pine needles mixed with diesel exhaust from federal vehicles. But underneath it all was something sweeter: the scent of justice served with Christmas cookies and federal arrest warrants. Sometimes the good guys really do win. Christmas Eve, 7 p.m. The Fletcher farm barn glowed against Montana winter darkness, strung with lights that had survived arson attempts, federal investigations, and enough criminal conspiracies to fill a Netflix series. Over 600 people gathered despite terrorism threats, creating the most well-documented Christmas service in state history. National news trucks lined the driveway like mechanical vultures. Satellite dishes pointed skyward while reporters delivered breathless updates about federal agents and Christmas miracles. The smell of hot chocolate mixed with diesel exhaust and pine needles. An olfactory cocktail that screamed America louder than 4th of July fireworks. Pastor Williams approached the FBI wired microphone. "Friends, we gather to celebrate Christmas, community, and truth's victory over deception." Applause echoed across the valley like thunder. But Victoria's network had one final desperate play. 3 black SUVs roared up the driveway with aggressive intimidation designed to terrify civilians and challenge federal agents. Sheriff Martinez stepped out with backup deputies and emergency officials, enough badges to stock a law enforcement convention. "Ladies and gentlemen," Martinez announced through a bullhorn that made his voice sound like an angry deity, "this gathering is ordered to disperse immediately. We have emergency authority to clear this property due to ongoing safety violations and terrorist activities. Emergency authority during Christmas service with 600 witnesses and national media present." The crowd stirred uneasily. Despite federal protection, local law enforcement still carried psychological weight for people intimidated by Victoria's months-long campaign. "This property has been determined unsafe for public assembly," Martinez continued, "and anyone remaining faces arrest for unlawful assembly." That's when Agent Sarah Sterling stepped into the spotlight with the confidence of someone holding royal flushes in a poker game full of Go Fish players. "Sheriff Martinez," her voice carried across the barn without amplification, "explain your authority to override federal protection of this property." Martinez's bullhorn voice cracked. "Federal agents don't have jurisdiction over local safety emergencies." "Actually, we do, especially when emergencies are manufactured by criminal conspirators under federal arrest." Sarah held up an official document that caught barn lights like a legal weapon. "Federal court order establishing exclusive federal jurisdiction over this property." National news cameras swiveled between Sarah and Martinez like spectators at a tennis match played with law degrees and arrest warrants. "Furthermore," Sarah continued, gaining freight train momentum, "any interference with this federally protected gathering constitutes obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, and civil rights conspiracy." Martinez's backup deputies exchanged glances, clearly saying nobody mentioned federal charges in the briefing. But the real mic drop moment came when I stepped forward with grandfather's preservation agreement and a folder thick enough to choke a horse. The federal revelation. "Sheriff Martinez, before continuing this charade, you should know every member of Victoria Ashworth's criminal network was arrested 2 hours ago by federal agents executing simultaneous warrants across 3 states. The crowd's murmur turned into excited chatter, better than any Christmas pageant they'd seen. County Commissioner Walsh, federal custody for accepting bribes. Bank President Tom Walsh, arrested for wire fraud conspiracy. Environmental Inspector Kowalski, Federal prison for impersonating officials. I flipped through arrest records like reading a Christmas wish list. And Victoria Ashworth, currently enjoying federal hospitality on terrorism, organized fraud, and 20 other felonies. Martinez's face went Christmas snow pale. That's impossible. I just spoke with Commissioner Walsh. You spoke with federal agents using Walsh's phone. He's been cooperating since this afternoon. Sarah smiled like a cat discovering a mouse warehouse. Join him in custody or withdraw these illegal orders and let this community celebrate Christmas peacefully. The community victory. The barn fell silent except for news camera hums and distant sounds of backup deputies quietly retreating to vehicles. Sheriff Martinez, Pastor Williams said gently, you're welcome to stay for service. We have plenty of hot chocolate. But Martinez lowered his bullhorn, surveyed 600 faces ranging from sympathetic to hostile, and made the smart choice. We're withdrawing emergency orders pending further review. The crowd exploded in applause, probably registering on neighboring state seismographs. National cameras captured every moment. Federal showdown, criminal arrests, community victory over organized corruption. The Christmas triumph. Now, Pastor Williams announced, let us celebrate Christ's birth and justice's rebirth in Pine Ridge Valley. As Christmas carols filled the barn, I felt grandfather's presence in pine scent, community warmth, and satisfaction of seeing bullies face consequences. Margaret's Christmas cookies mixed with justice's sweetness served at perfect temperature, ice cold with federal prison sentence sides. Outside, news crews broadcast the story, making Victoria Ashworth the poster child for federal justice protecting rural families. Inside, 600 people celebrated Christmas and suburban tyranny's defeat with hot chocolate and community spirit no money can buy or corruption destroy. The taste of victory was sweeter than any Christmas cookie, and the sound of carols mixed with the distant rumble of federal vehicles carrying criminals to justice created a symphony that would have made my grandfather weep with pride. Sometimes David really does beat Goliath, especially when David carries a federal badge and Goliath commits terrorism on federally protected property. 6 months later, Pine Ridge Valley looked like a completely different place. The McMansions were still there, but somehow they seemed smaller, less imposing, like bullies who'd been exposed and defanged. The real change was in the community spirit. People actually talked to each other again instead of hiding behind HOA regulations and property value anxieties. Victoria Ashworth had pled guilty to federal racketeering charges in exchange for 18 years in federal prison. Her nephew Derek got 15 years for environmental terrorism. The entire network of corrupt officials faced similar sentences, creating the largest rural corruption prosecution in Montana history. But the real justice came in the restitution. Federal asset forfeiture had recovered over $40 million from Victoria's shell companies, money that was being returned to the families she'd defrauded. The Johnsons got their ranch back. The Kowalskis were rebuilding their farm. Old Pete Brennan's family received enough compensation to restore their property and establish a college fund for his grandchildren. The Fletcher Farm Christmas tree business was thriving beyond anything my grandfather could have imagined. What started as a community Christmas service had become an annual tradition, drawing families from across the region. We'd harvested and sold over 2,000 trees this season, with waiting lists for next year, but the barn had become something more important than a Christmas tree operation. The Fletcher Agricultural Protection Center now provided free legal assistance to rural families facing HOA harassment, development pressure, and fraudulent enforcement actions. Margaret Henley ran the day-to-day operations with the efficiency of someone who'd managed third graders for 40 years. Hank supervised the mechanical workshop where we restored vintage farm equipment for families who couldn't afford new machinery. The center had already helped 12 families across Montana and Wyoming fight off similar schemes. Turns out Victoria's operation wasn't unique. Rural property fraud was a growing problem nationwide, targeting elderly and vulnerable families with manufactured violations and impossible debt. Our success had attracted attention from federal legislators. Senator Richardson was sponsoring the Rural Property Protection Act, which would strengthen federal agricultural protections and provide resources for families fighting development fraud. The bill was expected to pass next session, potentially protecting thousands of family farms from future Victoria Ashworths. The community impact went beyond legal protection. The annual Fletcher Farm Festival had become Pine Ridge Valley's biggest economic driver, bringing tourism revenue and national attention to local businesses. Margaret's Christmas cookies were now selling online to customers in 48 states. Hank's Auto Shop had expanded to 3 bays and hired 2 additional mechanics. Even the California transplants had embraced the community spirit. The tech couple who'd initially supported Victoria now volunteered at the Protection Center, using their marketing expertise to help other rural communities document and publicize similar fraud schemes. But the moment I knew we'd truly won came last week during the monthly town meeting. The agenda included standard items: road maintenance, school funding, winter preparedness, no emergency motions, no manufactured crises, no HOA power grabs disguised as community protection, just normal people discussing normal problems and finding reasonable solutions. After the meeting, I walked through the barn where my grandfather's portrait hung next to the Federal Agricultural Preservation Certificate. The smell of old hay mixed with pine resin from this year's Christmas tree inventory. Moonlight streamed through windows that had seen 60 years of Montana seasons, and I could almost hear Harold's voice in the winter wind. "You did good, son. You kept the promise." My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Sterling. "New case in Wyoming. Developer using water rights fraud to steal ranch properties. Similar pattern to Victoria's operation. Interested in consulting?" I looked around the barn where everything started 6 months ago. The community had healed. The criminals were in federal prison. Justice had been served with Christmas cookies and constitutional protections. But there were other families out there facing the same nightmare we'd endured. Other elderly property owners being targeted by sophisticated fraud schemes. Other communities being torn apart by organized greed disguised as development progress. I texted back, "When do we start?" Sometimes the best Christmas gift is the opportunity to keep giving. The Fletcher farm would continue serving Christmas trees to families across Montana. But it would also serve something more important: proof that communities can defeat corruption, federal law protects those who know how to use it, and sometimes the good guys really do win when they're willing to fight for what's right.